They locked her in a steel room with no food, no light, and no name. They thought she was just another smuggled woman, mute, broken, forgettable. But 3 days later, when they cut the power to break her will, she started humming a song only battlefield ghosts remember. The guards didn't know her name, didn't care. They stripped her ID, burned her clothes, and cataloged her into their system like she was cargo. Unit 93, that's all they called her. A number printed in gray on a scrap of canvas tied around her wrist. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The facility was buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and concrete. It didn't officially exist. Even the guards used fake names. No one asked questions. Not even the new hires who were told, if you hear screaming, don't open the doors. If you hear nothing, definitely don't. Her cell was 6 feet by 6, no windows, no toilet, just a rusted drain in the center, and chains bolted to the walls. The light above flickered constantly, buzzing like a mosquito in heat. The walls were stained in old blood and older sweat. Every other prisoner cried on their first night. She didn't. The first shift guard, Ramirez, bet $20 she wouldn't last a day. By morning he was fidgeting. By nightfall he owed half the floor money. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She hadn't moved from the corner. Knees tucked, hands resting on her lap like she was waiting for a train. She didn't scream, didn't plead, didn't even shiver when the temperature dropped to freezing. They tossed in a bowl of gruel once. She didn't touch it. She just looked at it, like it was bait, not food. On day 2, a female guard, Vera, entered with a clipboard and a forced smile. You speak English? No response. Russian? Ukrainian? Pashto? Still silence. The woman's eyes were open, alert, but distant, like she wasn't in the room at all. Vera made a note. Not responsive. Possible trauma state. Schedule for psychological assessment. She left the clipboard behind. Later it was returned with the corners shredded and the paper folded into perfect triangles, military origami. On day 3, the teasing stopped. They cut the food, cut the water, cut the camera feeds. Officially it was isolation conditioning. Unofficially, they wanted to see what it took to make her beg. 4 guards entered that night. No weapons, no orders, just bad intentions and latex gloves. She didn't scream when the first punch landed. Didn't whimper when they slammed her against the wall. When the second hit dislocated her shoulder, she blinked once, nothing more. One guard, Jensen, knelt and hissed into her ear. You think silence will save you? She looked up for the first time, not in fear, not in anger, just a flat, soul-deep stare that made him recoil. They dragged her by the ankle across the floor, leaving a trail of blood, left her there like trash, laughing, breathing heavy, already forgetting her. 5 minutes later, a sound echoed through the hall. Crunch. The surveillance officer jumped, rewound the feed, paused, leaned in. She had popped her dislocated shoulder back into place, alone. No tools, no sound. Then she stood, walked calmly to the center of the room, sat down, closed her eyes, and started humming. Low, rhythmic. It wasn't a lullaby. It wasn't any song the officer recognized. But something about it made his spine crawl. That same night, another prisoner, cell 17B, leaned toward the wall vent and whispered, she's not new to this. The whisper spread, fast, like gasoline on a fire. Rumors formed faster than facts. Did you hear? She didn't flinch, cracked her own joint without making a sound. Used to be special ops, maybe still is. On day 5, they offered her food again. Rice, spoiled. Just to see if she'd break and eat it. She picked it up with her fingers, sorted it calmly, picked out the maggots one by one, lined them up, counted them. 10, she said, her first word, in perfect English. The room went silent. Later that night, one of the junior guards, Omar, got curious, slipped into the record room, typed in, Unit 93, nothing. But then he searched her intake photo by facial match, and what popped up wasn't just a file. It was a dossier. Redacted lines, multiple agencies, one phrase not blacked out, Ixfil priority, Phoenix division, code name, Imber status, MIA last seen, Darga Province mission. Classified survival rating, 0. There was a photo, worn, but unmistakable, same cheekbones, same scar over the right brow. In the photo, she wore fatigues, a tactical harness, dog tags burned into her chest, and eyes that had already seen the end of the world. Omar dropped the file, ran to find Holtz. But Holtz wasn't in the control room anymore. He was in her cell, alone. The lights flickered, then died. The hallway monitors went dark, power cut, silence. Then over the radio, a voice, cold, rough, dead calm. You starved me for days. I starved for months. You think you broke me, you only fed the fire. When the backup generators kicked in, the lights surged. The monitors came back. She was standing behind Holtz, unchained, unbloodied, and holding his badge in her hand. They expected her to break before dawn. They expected the silence to snap. They expected screams to fill the cold halls. But when morning came, she was still there, sitting like a statue, unmoved, unbroken. The other prisoners whispered about her, told stories that sounded like myths. She's from another world. A soldier turned ghost, the kind of woman who could stare death in the eye and blink last. Her eyes told no story, only shadows, the kind you see in war zones, where hope goes to die. On her first night, the cell was colder than any winter storm. No blanket, no mattress, just the bare concrete. She'd been stripped of everything, clothes, shoes, even the rough cloth band on her wrist. The guards joked they could starve her until she was nothing but bones. But she had survived worse. Flashbacks haunted her dreams. A desert sun burning her skin, chains biting into her wrists, a distant explosion that never seemed to end. She remembered the day they took her, the firefight in Darga Province, the blast that swallowed her squad, the moment the world went black, then the cold silence of the enemy compound, the endless questioning, the pain without end, the nights spent counting stars she couldn't see. She wasn't just a captive here, she was a prisoner of war reborn into another hell. The guards noticed her calm, her lack of fear. It unnerved them. They tried to provoke her, shouted insults, slapped her face, but she didn't react. One night, a guard tried to scare her, pulled a knife across her arm, left a shallow cut. She blinked, whispered a word in a language no one understood. The guard staggered back, eyes wide with fear. Other prisoners began to watch her closely. Some even offered small gifts, a scrap of bread, a stolen blanket. She accepted none. Her silence was a fortress, impenetrable. One prisoner, an old man named Karim, whispered, "She's waiting for something." But no one knew what. On the third day, Holtz brought in a new interrogator, a man called Commander Rourke. His reputation preceded him. Rourke was cold, calculating, a master of psychological warfare. He sat across from her, speaking softly, trying to unravel her silence, promising freedom, threatening pain. She said nothing, only watched. Rourke grew frustrated. He left bruises on his own ego. Meanwhile, outside the cell, whispers turned into rumors. The guards began calling her a name found in a forgotten file, the name of a woman who vanished years ago during a Black Ops mission. The night before the fifth day, she hummed again, a haunting melody that echoed through the halls. The guards shivered, and for the first time, the prisoners felt hope. They didn't know who she was yet, but they knew she was no ordinary captive. They just didn't know how far she had survived. Commander Rourke entered the cell block like a storm, cold steel in his eyes, the weight of untold cruelty in his hands. He was a man who had broken others, and believed this one would be no different. He watched her through the reinforced glass. Unit 93, Ember. Her silence was a challenge, a dare. Rourke was the new interrogator, brought in when the old guards failed to crack her. His reputation was brutal, a whisper in the corridors of intelligence agencies, feared by those who faced him. His first approach was quiet, soft words, promises of mercy. "Tell me your name," he said. "Tell me why you refused to talk." She didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stared. The guards whispered, "She's watching you, Rourke, not the other way around." He changed tactics, cold threats, isolation, long hours under glaring lights. "Break me," she seemed to say with her eyes. One night, he pushed too hard. He slapped her. Her face didn't move. Rourke leaned in close, whispered in her ear, "You will scream. You will beg." She smiled, just a flicker. A ghost of a smile. She whispered back, a phrase in a language no one recognized. It was a code, a prayer, a curse. The guards tensed. Even Rourke stepped back. The room grew cold. The silence deepened. Flashbacks flooded her mind. The war zone, the blast, the chains. She remembered the day her squad was captured. The firefight that left her bleeding in the dirt. The enemy soldiers dragging her away. She learned silence was survival. Learning to listen was power. She watched Rourke carefully, not as an enemy, but as a piece on a chessboard. She studied his habits, his weaknesses, his tells, every word he said, every breath he took. One morning, Rourke arrived with a stack of files. He threw them on the table. "Who are you really?" he demanded. She remained silent, but reached out and picked up one file. Inside was a photo, worn, but clear. Her face, in uniform, dog tags shining in the harsh light. "Ember." She whispered. Rourke's face paled. "You were declared." She nodded. His confidence cracked. The guards sensed it. Rourke was no longer in control, but he still had one card: isolation. For days she was kept in total darkness. No sounds, no light, no hope. But Ember survived. Because she had survived work. She thought of the tunnels where prisoners like her had disappeared. The screams muffled by stone walls. The faces she'd never forget. When the isolation ended, Ember sat up straight, met Rourke's gaze, and said one word: "Mercy." But it was not a plea. It was a warning. Rourke understood. She was not broken. She was preparing to fight back. And when she did, no one would be ready. The facility was filled with secrets. Whispers passed behind locked doors. Truths buried beneath layers of lies. Ember knew some better than anyone else. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was a key to secrets darker than the cell itself. The guards didn't know what they were guarding. They didn't know the files they shredded at night, or the conversations that stopped the moment they entered the room. Only Ember remembered. Her past wasn't just survival. It was rebellion, a mission swallowed whole by betrayal. Her team had been betrayed, left to die, and she was the only one who escaped. The fire followed her. Every silent moment in the cells was a reminder, a scar beneath the skin, a wound that refuted. The interrogations grew more depth, the questions more urgent. "Who sent you? What was your objective? Who else knows?" Ember said nothing, because she knew the cost of words. The price of secrets was blood. One night, Holt sneered. "You think you're special?" She met his gaze without flinching. "I'm the last thing you should fear." The room went silent, a challenge hanging in the stale air. Outside, a storm raged. The power flickered, and the facility trembled. Ember's mind raced, plans forming like shadows in the dark. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was moving, and the game was changing. The night was darker than usual. Storm clouds rolled over the compound, like a warning. The wind howled against the steel walls. Lights flickered. The air was thick with tension. Inside her cells, Ember felt it too. The walls were closing in. Or maybe something was breaking loose. Holtz paced the corridor outside her cell. He didn't like storms. They made him nervous, like the world was about to swallow him whole. He stopped, pressed his ear to the cold metal door. He thought he heard something, a whisper, a breath, but there was nothing. The guards shifted uneasily. One joked about the ghost haunting the halls. Another muttered about curses, but no one laughed. The power flickered again. And midnight, complete blackout. Emergency lights hummed on, red and dim, casting long shadows. In the darkness, Ember moved, slow, careful, a shadow among shadows. She touched the wall, felt the rough concrete, the chipped paint, the small crack near the floor. It was just enough. The guards scrambled to find flashlights, voices raised in confusion. Holtz cursed, but no one listened. Ember slipped through the small crack, freedom within reach. Outside the cell block, Alarms blared. Steel doors slammed shut. Guards scrambled for weapons. But Ember was already gone. She moved through the corridors like a ghost. Silent, invisible. She knew the layout, had memorized it in the silence, each step calculated. She passed the control room, hacking the terminal. Security cameras flickered back on, doors unlocked. The facility was a maze of chaos. Stop her, but no one could catch what they couldn't see. She found the arm, pulled out a weapon, not for violence, but for protection. Storm. Fun for protection. The storm outside raged louder, thunder crashing like the war drums in her head. The compound's perimeter was lined. But Ember had survived worse. She slipped through a fence hole she'd found days earlier, cutting through wire. Once outside, the rain soaked her. Once outside, the rain soaked her instantly. Couldn't stop. Behind her. But soaked her. But the storm hit her. She ran toward the forest, toward anything that wasn't concrete and steel. In the trees she paused, but freedom came with a price. She was alone, hunted, and everything she remembered was about to catch her. The forest was a world, apart from the cold prison walls. Rain soaked her to the bone. Branches whipped her face, but the earth beneath her feet felt alive, breathing with secrets. She moved silently, every step measured, every breath controlled. Behind her. Behind her. Light sliced through the darkness. Dogs bayed. Voices called her name like a curse. But Ember was gone. Her mind raced. She was no longer the prisoner. She was the hunter. Memories floated back. Training in the mountains. Survival drills. The way the wind carried sound. How shadows could hide you. She found a shallow cave, slipped inside, collapsed against the cold stone. Her body ached, shoulder still bruised, ribs sore from the beating. But her spirit burned brighter than ever. She knew they would come. They always came. The war had taught her one thing. Survival was a game of patience, and she was winning. Far away from the compound, a figure watched from the tree line, hidden, silent. He wasn't just a guard anymore. He was obsessed, determined to bring her back, or die trying. He whispered to himself. Back in the city, a network stirred. A group who believed Ember was still alive, who wanted her back. They were called the Phoenix Division. Elusive, deadly, and relentless. They had resources, contacts everywhere, and a plan. Ember wasn't just a prisoner. She was a symbol, a spark that could ignite. The forest breathed with each rustle came. Each rustle came. Her breath steady, her senses sharp. She was no longer just her voice. She was remembering. Flashbacks came unbidden. The smell of smoke and blood. The faces of fallen comrades. The betrayal that turned endless. Enemy. She had been a soldier once, trained for combat. For sacrifice. For missions no one else dared. But war had a way of swallowing the blood. Ember's heart ached with the weight of loss. But her resolve hardened like steel. She recalled the last order she received. Protect the package at all costs. The package. The secret she had carried deep inside her pack. It wasn't just documents. It wasn't just documents. It wasn't just intel. A key to exposing lies that could topple governments. Her captors wanted that key. They believed she had it. And they were willing to kill for it. In the darkness, a sound broke her. Footsteps, soft, calculated. She froze, blended into the shadows, held her breath. 2 minutes. Whispering in a language she barely recognized. Phoenix Division is closing in. We need to find it. Before they do, Ember's blood ran cold. But newly, she had no time. She moved again, faster, more cautiously. The forest was her refuge, but it was also a trap. She needed answers. Her only hope was to reach the resistance. But Ember's fire burned bright. The resistance wasn't weak. But to get there she had to survive the night. The stars above were hidden behind storm clouds. The world was dark, hidden between jagged cliffs and dense forests. The villagers eyed her warily. Stranger, enemy or ally. A woman. The woman stepped forward, dark eyes sharp as knives. Who are you? She demanded. Ember met her gaze. A spark ignited. The woman nodded. I'm Leda. You're safe here, for now. Inside a dim hut, Ember shared what she could. Tales of capture, of betrayal, of the secret she carried. Leda listened, her expression unreadable. We've been waiting for you, not just to survive, to fight back. Ember's arrival shifted everything. Hope returned. The spark was becoming a flame, but enemies were closing in. Every move watched, every breath counted. She couldn't trust easily, not after what she'd lost. Yet in Leda's eyes, Ember saw something she hadn't felt in years. Trust. Together they plotted, a plan to strike at the heart of the enemy. But time was running out. The hunters were relentless, and Ember knew one truth. To save them all she'd have to face the darkness inside herself. Trust was a currency Ember couldn't afford. In this broken world, trust was fragile, like glass. Beautiful but dangerous, easy to shatter. Leda's village was a sanctuary, a small dot of hope in a land scarred by war. But sanctuaries were never guaranteed. Ember felt the weight of countless eyes watching her, some filled with hope, others filled with suspicion. She knew every gaze held a question. Could she be trusted? Could she be protected? Could she... Or would she bring danger upon them all? Night after night, Ember trained the villagers, taught them to move unseen through shadows, showed them how to strike hard and vanish before the enemy could react, taught them how to fight with what they had. Her hands guided theirs, her voice steady and calm, her presence a shield against fear. Her presence a shield against fear. She became more than a stranger, more than a warrior. She became the shield, her face serious, her eyes sharp. There's someone you need to meet. From the scarred stepped a man, tall scarred. Leda said softly, he's our best chance. Ember studied him carefully. There was something both familiar and unsettling about him, with the kind of knowledge only her blood and fire. But things past taught her one vital truth. Not everyone who claimed to be a friend was one. She remembered the faces of those who betrayed her, allies who turned their backs, friends who became enemies. Betrayal often came from the closest places. That night well, questioning every word Wraith had spoken, analyzing every look, listening to every silence. Her mind was a battle of trust and doubt, weighing hope against survival. She knew that trusting risked, but it could also mean distrust. The price of trust was high, and she was about to pay it. In the cold darkness to fight for the resistance, to hold on to hope, even if it meant risk. Because of the world shattered by wars, sometimes the greatest risk.
Beneath the surface, secrets festered like wounds refusing to heal. The resistance was a fragile alliance, held together by necessity, not trust. Every handshake was a gamble. Every whispered word a potential trap. Rafe's presence brought hope and suspicion. He moved with confidence, a calm that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ember watched him closely. Every glance,
every word, every hesitation. At first, he seemed genuine. A fighter with scars like hers, a man who had lost everything but the will to fight. But sometimes, the darkest lies wore the kindest masks. One night, under a sky heavy with stars, Ember followed him. Silent steps in the cool air, heart pounding, eyes sharp. She trailed him through winding forest paths, past the sleeping village, into the heart of the resistance hidden base. There, beneath a battered tarp, voices whispered. Plans drawn on tattered maps, deals made in hushed tones. She froze, listening. Her blood turning cold. They spoke of selling information, of betrayals, of trade-offs with enemies she once fought to destroy. Rafe's voice was clear, smooth, cold. Ember's world cracked. The walls she had built shattered. Betrayal wasn't a distant nightmare anymore. It was real, and it was here. The weight of it crushed her chest, but she refused to fall. Not now. She waited, watched, planned. Days passed. The village hummed with tension. Whispers floated through the air like smoke. Then came the confrontation. In the dead of night, under a moon that cast silver light on broken promises, Ember stood before Rafe, eyes blazing, voice steady but fierce. I know. He smiled, a bitter broken thing. A soldier's secrets are never safe. I trusted you. Trust is a weapon. His words were daggers. His smile was a wound. You think this is about loyalty? He sneered. It's about power, survival, control. Ember's hand clenched into a fist, her voice low but resolute. You chose to betray your own. Rafe's eyes flickered. For a moment something like regret flashed, but it was gone before she could grasp it. You don't understand. I understand enough. She turned away, determined to protect what remained. She couldn't trust anyone but herself. That was enough. The night air was heavy, thick with unspoken threats. Ember knew the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But now she had clarity. A new enemy in the shadows. And the resistance was no longer just a refuge. It was a battlefield. The days after the betrayal were heavy with silence. A quiet tension wrapped around the village like a thick fog. Every face held questions. Every glance carried suspicion. Ember moved through the narrow streets like a ghost, haunted by Rafe's treachery, but her resolve burned brighter than ever. She couldn't allow the resistance to fracture, not now, not when so much was at stake. The betrayal had exposed them, their secrets, their weaknesses, but it also ignited a fire, a need for justice, a thirst for vengeance. She called the leaders together, under the cloak of night, inside a hidden cave. The room was thick with tension, voices were hushed, eyes darted around, searching for allies or enemies. Ember's voice cut through the silence. We cannot afford to fall apart. We must be stronger than our enemies, and stronger than our fears. Some nodded slowly. Others remained silent. Fear lingered like a shadow. Outside, the forest stood still, a silent witness to their fragile unity. Ember planned with precision, raids to disrupt the enemy. Supply runs through treacherous paths, messages sent to allies beyond the borders. Every plan was a gamble, every move calculated with care. The enemy wasn't waiting. Search parties scoured the woods. The hunters closed in. One night flames tore through the village. Explosions shattered the peace. Homes burned to ash. Screams echoed in the darkness. Ember fought fiercely, like a cornered wolf, relentless, unyielding. She rallied the survivors, pushed them toward safety. But even her strength had limits. The resistance scattered, forced to flee deeper into the wilderness. The fight for survival had only just begun. Every step was shadowed by danger. Every breath could be their last. Ember vowed to rebuild, to gather allies, to take back what was lost. The forest was no longer just a refuge. It was a battlefield. And Ember was ready to lead the charge. The wilderness was cruel and unforgiving. Rain soaked the rebels to the bone. Cold seeped into their bones like a relentless enemy. But Ember's spirit burned hotter than any storm. She became the beacon in the darkness, a leader forged in fire and betrayal. The scattered resistance slowly gathered, fragments of hope converging in secret clearings. Ember pushed them harder. Every day was a battle. Every moment was survival. She trained the fighters relentlessly. sharpened their skills, taught them to be shadows in storms. News of their survival spread. Whispers reached far beyond the forest. Allies began to answer the call. Weapons were smuggled in. Supplies arrived under cover of darkness. Ember's network was growing. The fire rekindled, but with growth came risk. Enemy spies lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike. One night a traitor's message was uncovered. Plans leaked to the enemy. Ember's heart sank. Betrayal was a poison. It spread fast, but she refused to let it consume them. She tightened security, rooted out the enemy within. The cost was high. Trust became a luxury again, but the cause was worth it. Freedom was worth every sacrifice. Ember prepared for the next strike, a blow that would shake the enemy to its core. The fire was no longer just survival. It was revolution. Betrayal cut deeper than any blade. It lurked within their ranks like a shadow, silent, deadly. Ember's trust was shattered. Her eyes searched every face, every ally. Whispers of doubt spread like wildfire. Who was the traitor? Who was working against them? The village became a powder keg. Tensions flared. Old wounds reopened. Ember took it upon herself to uncover the truth, to protect what was left. She held secret meetings, gathered clues, watched carefully. One night she caught a glimpse, a shadow slipping through the trees, a figure passing forbidden messages. It was one of their own, a trusted friend turned enemy. Confrontation was inevitable. Ember faced the traitor alone, under a sky heavy with rain. The confession came quickly, motivated by fear, by promises of safety. Ember's heart ached, but her resolve hardened. There was no room for weakness, no room for betrayal. The traitor was cast out, banished into the wilderness, but the cost lingered. Trust had to be rebuilt, slowly, carefully. Ember vowed to protect her people, from enemies without and within. The fight was far from over. The dawn broke cold and gray. Ember stood at the edge of the clearing. Her eyes scanned the horizon, every muscle tense, every sense alert. The enemy was coming, their numbers vast, their intent deadly. But Ember's heart was steady, her resolve unshakable. She had trained for this moment, fought for this moment, sacrificed for this moment. Her people gathered behind her, scarred but unbroken, determined to fight. The air was thick with anticipation, silence before the storm. Ember raised her hand, a signal, the call to arms. The battle erupted like thunder. Shouts and gunfire filled the air. Smoke curled toward the sky. Ember moved like a force of nature, fierce and fearless, leading her people with fire in her eyes. The enemy pressed hard, but the resistance fought harder. Every inch of ground was paid for in blood, every victory carved from pain. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Ember saw the enemy falter, their lines break, their courage wane. With a roar she charged forward, a beacon of hope, a storm of justice. The final stand was won, but the cost was great. Ember stood among the ruins, silent, reflective. She had led them through darkness and into the dawn. The fight was over, but the journey had just begun. The dawn was different this time. Soft light spilled across the scarred earth. Birds sang cautiously from the trees. The world was waking from a long nightmare. Ember stood at the edge of the village, wounds fresh but spirit unbroken. The weight of loss pressed heavy on her shoulders. She looked out over the faces of survivors, tired eyes filled with hope, children playing among ruins, life stubbornly refusing to be extinguished. The enemy was defeated, but the battle for their future was only beginning. Ember vowed to rebuild, not just homes, but trust, community, a new way of life. She reached out to distant allies, sending messages of peace and strength, gathering those who still believed. The fire that had consumed so much was now a spark, a promise, a beacon to those lost in darkness. Ember understood the cost of freedom. It was paid in tears, in sacrifices, in unbreakable will. She carried those memories with her, a reminder of what had been lost, and what could never be forgotten. As the sun rose higher, Ember took a deep breath. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. This was the dawn of a new beginning. The war was over, but its scars ran deep. Ember stood alone at the edge of the ruins. The silence around her was heavy. She closed her eyes and breathed in the cold morning air. Memories of the past flooded her mind. The battles, the betrayals, the sacrifices. She thought of those who had fallen, names etched into her heart, their voices whispering on the wind. But Ember knew the fight was never truly finished. It lived on in stories, in the lives of those who survived, in the hope for a better tomorrow. The village was slowly rebuilding. Hands once calloused from war now worked to heal. Brick by brick, dream by dream, children ran through the streets again, laughter replacing the echoes of gunfire. Life stubbornly refusing to be extinguished. Ember turned to face the rising sun, her heart steady, her spirit unbroken. She carried the legacy of the forgotten, the strength of those who came before her, the promise of a future worth fighting for. This was her story, their story, a story of resilience, of courage, of survival. And as the first light of dawn painted the sky, Ember stepped forward, into the future. The war had ended on paper, but in Ember's heart it was never over. The sound of a match striking still made her flinch. The smell of burning wood still twisted her stomach. And the silence between laughter still made her reach for a weapon she no longer carried. The village was healing. New fences, new walls, new children, who didn't know the names of the fallen. But Ember, she was still a soldier walking in a civilian's skin. They said time softened everything. They lied. Some things sharpened, especially memory. She sat on the edge of her cot every morning before dawn, waiting for something to go wrong. Not because she wanted it to, but because it always had. Lyda had begged her to rest, to trust, to live. But trust was a luxury she had unlearned in the blackness of the POW camp. And living, that required a future. Ember had only trained for survival. It was nearly winter when the knock came. 3 soft taps, then silence. A military rhythm disguised as casual. But it was not a pattern you forgot. She rose instantly, crossed the room in 3 strides. No breath, no hesitation. She opened the door with her right hand and slid the blade from her boot with her left. Just in case. The man standing in the doorway was a ghost. Or should have been. His beard was patchy, his eyes sunken, and his coat 2 sizes too big. Mud clung to him like shame. But his eyes were still sharp. "Miles," she whispered, voice cracking like dry leaves. He nodded, barely, and then collapsed into her arms. She caught him with ease, muscle memory kicking in before emotion could. He hadn't died in the final raid. He'd disappeared. Rumors had claimed he turned traitor. Others said he'd gone mad in the snow. But Ember knew better. Dead men didn't knock. When he came to, he was beside her fire, wrapped in a wool blanket, a cup of broth shaking in his hands. "I followed the noise," he said. "What noise?" she asked. "The quiet," he replied. "Too quiet. That's how I knew it was real." He looked older than she remembered, more tired than anyone had a right to be. She waited, didn't speak, didn't comfort, because comfort came after the story. "I found something," he finally said, pulled a folder from under his coat. It was wrapped in oilcloth, frayed, dirty, but Ember's hands shook as she opened it. Inside, names, coordinates, photographs, emblems she hadn't seen since the camps. "It's them," he said. "The architects. The ones who ran the supply chains. The ones who bought and sold people like cattle. They're alive. They're thriving." Ember's stomach turned. She stared at a photo of a man in a suit, smiling at a charity gala. She'd seen him before, in another life, behind mirrored glass, watching her starve. "They're not hiding anymore," Miles said. "They changed names, jobs, but not hearts. They think we're dead. They think the silence is forgiveness.
Ember clenched her jaw. The fire popped behind them. "No one will believe us," she muttered. "They will," he said. "When we show them what's beneath their cities." He pointed to the map, dotted with tunnels, storage sites, safe houses. "Another network," he explained. "But this time it's not about prisoners. It's about erasing evidence, killing memory." And Ember couldn't let that happen. Not again. She stood slowly, walked to her chest, opened the false bottom, pulled out her pack, still lined with ash and steel. "I told myself I'd never wear this again," she said. "But ghosts don't walk because they're angry. They walk because they were never buried properly." Miles stood too. "Then let's bury them." They left the next morning before dawn. Lyda didn't cry. She only pressed a folded note into Ember's hand. "If you ever come back," she said, "we'll still be here." "If I come back," Ember replied, "I'll come back with peace." And with that, Ember vanished into the morning fog once again. No longer a refugee. No longer just a survivor. She was something else now, something colder, something clear. A storm the world had forgotten, but one that never stopped brewing. Because ghosts may haunt the living. But Ember, she hunted them. The war had ended on paper. But in Ember's heart, it was never over. The sound of a match striking still made her flinch. The smell of burning wood still twisted her stomach. And the silence between laughter still made her reach for a weapon she no longer carried. The village was healing. New fences, new walls, new children who didn't know the names of the fallen. But Ember, she was still a soldier walking in a civilian's skin. They said time softened everything. They lied. Some things sharpened, especially memory. She sat on the edge of her cot every morning before dawn, waiting for something to go wrong. Not because she wanted it to, but because it always had. Lyda had begged her to rest, to trust, to live. But trust was a luxury she had unlearned in the blackness of the POW camp. And living, that required a future. Ember had only trained for survival. It was nearly winter when the knock came. 3 soft taps, then silence. A military rhythm, disguised as casual. But it was not a pattern you forgot. She rose instantly, crossed the room in 3 strides. No breath, no hesitation. She opened the door with her right hand and slid the blade from her boot with her left. Just in case. The man standing in the doorway was a ghost. Or should have been. His beard was patchy, his eyes sunken, and his coat 2 sizes too big. Mud clung to him like shame. But his eyes were still sharp. "Miles," she whispered, voice cracking like dry leaves. He nodded, barely, and then collapsed into her arms. She caught him with ease, muscle memory kicking in before emotion could. He hadn't died in the final raid. He'd disappeared. Rumors had claimed he turned traitor. Others said he'd gone mad in the snow. But Ember knew better. Dead men didn't knock. When he came to, he was beside her fire, wrapped in a wool blanket, a cup of broth shaking in his hands. "I followed the noise," he said. "What noise?" she asked. "The quiet," he replied. "Too quiet. That's how I knew it was real." He looked older than she remembered, more tired than anyone had a right to be. She waited, didn't speak, didn't comfort, because comfort came after the story. "I found something," he finally pulled a folder from under his coat. It was wrapped in oilcloth, frayed, dirty. But Ember's hands shook as she opened it. Inside, names, coordinates, photographs, emblems she hadn't seen since the camps. "It's them," he said. "The architects. The ones who ran the supply chains. The ones who bought and sold people like cattle. They're alive, they're thriving." Ember's stomach turned. She stared at a photo of a man in a suit, smiling at a charity gala. She'd seen him before, in another life, behind mirrored glass, watching her starve. "They're not hiding anymore," Miles said. They changed names, jobs, but not hearts. They think we're dead. They think the silence is forgiveness. Ember clenched her jaw. The fire popped behind them. No one will believe us, she muttered. They will, he said, when we show them what's beneath their cities. He pointed to the map, dotted with tunnels, storage sites, safe houses. Another network, he explained. But this time it's not about prisoners. It's about erasing evidence, killing memory. And Ember couldn't let that happen. Not again. She stood slowly, walked to her chest, opened the false bottom, pulled out her pack, still lined with ash and steel. I told myself I'd never wear this again, she said. But ghosts don't walk because they're angry. They walk because they were never buried properly. Miles stood too. Then let's bury them. They left the next morning before dawn. Lyda didn't cry. She only pressed a folded note into Ember's hand. If you ever come back, she said, we'll still be here. If I come back, Ember replied, I'll come back with peace. And with that, Ember vanished into the morning fog once again. No longer a refugee. No longer just a survivor. She was something else now. Something colder. Something clear. A storm the world had forgotten. But one that never stopped brewing. Because ghosts may haunt the living. But Ember, she hunted them. The world outside Leda's village was louder than Ember remembered. Cities buzzed. People rushed. No one looked twice at a woman in worn boots and a tired gaze, which made it easier. Easier to move between shadows. Easier to disappear into crowds. Miles walked beside her, slower now. He still limped from the mines, where his knee was shattered during escape. But he never complained, only studied the map like it was gospel. Their first stop was Dulwich, a city dressed in glass and steel. But underneath the glimmer, it stank of secrets. The address led them to a corporate building with mirrored windows and white walls. Clean, untouchable, fake. This used to be a supply checkpoint, Miles said. Back when they wore uniforms instead of suits. Inside nothing hinted at its past. Receptionists smiled. Security guards yawned. But Ember's skin crawled, because behind the glass walls she saw him. The man from the photo, Gregor Vell, face. Now calling himself Mr. Vell, chairman of Vell Global Logistics, charity partner, public speaker, human trafficker, war profiteer. She watched it as he shook hands, laughed, kissed a baby for a press shoot. And all she could see were bones. The bones of girls left starving. The blood of soldiers betrayed. Miles touched her. Not yet, he whispered. We need more. They trailed him. From the office to his estate. From the estate to a hidden basement. It took 3 nights to break the locks. But what waited inside wasn't just incriminating. It was revolting. Files, names, photos, tapes, not from Ember's camp. From others. Dozens, hundreds. Evidence that the system hadn't just survived. It had evolved. Upgraded. Polished. Disguised in paperwork and legal loopholes. Miles filmed everything. Ember cataloged names. It was the first time in years she cried. Not for herself but for them. Children stolen. Soldiers silenced. Whistleblowers erased. We can't take this to the media, Ember said. They'll bury it. They always do. No bull. Miles replied. We take it to her. Ember blinked. Who? Judge Emerita Hale. The name hit like cold water. Hale had been a military prosecutor once. She'd sentenced Ember's former commanding officer to life for trafficking weapons, then vanished from public life. Some said she'd been threatened. Others said she'd lost faith. But Miles, he had her address. Off-grid. In the North Wards. If anyone still remembers justice, he said, it's her. They traveled for 2 days through rain and checkpoint detours. The roads were monitored now.
Freedom had a price. But Ember had learned to move like smoke. No trace. They reached the house by moonlight. Walled. Silent. Miles knocked 3 times. Then once more. The door creaked open. And there she stood. Older. Colder. Eyes like ice. "What do you want?" Hale asked. "Redemption," Ember said. "And revenge." Hale let them in. No small talk. No comfort. Just a fire crackling and a pistol on the table. They laid out the evidence. Photo after photo. Name after name. She said nothing for 20 minutes. Then stood and poured herself a drink. "They've made me offers," Hale muttered. "Every year. I burned them." She turned to Ember. "I'll help. But only if we end them completely." Ember didn't flinch. "That's the only kind of ending I believe in." They spent the night forming a plan. 3 targets. 3 cities. 3 takedowns. Simultaneous. Unignorable. Miles would handle the data breach. Hale would leak to allies, still embedded in the Justice Ministry. And Ember, she would handle the worst part. She would go to the camp ruins, where it all began, where they left her to rot. Because sometimes, to destroy a monster, you have to return to the place it was born.
The train tracks had rusted, nature was reclaiming what evil once owned. But Ember remembered every step, every scream, every silence. She stood before the ruins of Camp 11K. It looked smaller now. No guards, no fences, just echoes. The wind howled through broken beams. Ashes had long settled. But Ember could still smell the rot, not from bodies, but from memory. Every stone whispered her name. Every shadow remembered her pain. Miles had offered to come, but Ember said no. This journey had to be walked alone. She moved past the rusted gates. The old guard post had collapsed. The mess hall, gone. But the underground cells, still there, still intact. She descended slowly, flashlight trembling in her hand. Moss covered the walls, but her marks, her scratched messages remained. Still here, not broken. Remember me. She had written them on nights she thought she'd die. Now they were scripture. This was her cathedral of survival, and she had returned as the final priestess. She reached the cell at the end, the one they'd locked her in. For days, without food, without light, without hope, she stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and sat. For 1 hour, she said nothing. Just breathed, just listened, to the silence that had once nearly killed her. Then she rose, pulled out the device from her coat, a high-gain transmitter, wired to Miles' breach terminal. She placed it on the wall. "This is where it started," she whispered into the mic. "But it ends in daylight." She activated the upload. Across the country, Hale's contacts began receiving files. Government officials, international watchdogs, even the press, no longer whispers in the dark. Now it was a scream, a reckoning. She climbed out from the cellar like a phoenix from ashes. Above ground, the sky was turning red, sunrise, or blood. She couldn't tell. Then came the sound, distant, rumbling, engines. She turned. 4 black vehicles approached the ruins. Not police, not press, but them. The men who had always pulled the strings, the ones behind Gregor and Vass, behind the generals, behind the wars. And now they were here, because they knew the files had been sent, and they couldn't let her walk away. Ember didn't run. She stood, still, unarmed, but not powerless. The first man stepped out, slick suit, scar above his brow. He smiled like death. "You've caused quite the mess," he said. "You should have stayed buried." Ember said nothing. The second man joined him. He held a folder, thin, official. "A pardon," he said. "Signed. You walk away. No trials, no stories." Ember stepped forward. "Did you bring food this time?" she asked coldly. They paused, confused. She pointed to the ground beneath her. "To the cell you left me in. To the girl you tried to erase." The first man frowned. "What are you?" But he never finished, because Ember had already moved. Fast. silent, lethal. She grabbed the second man, twisting his arm, slamming him against the rusted gate. The first lunged, but she was ready. Years of pain had taught her where to break. They collapsed, groaning, broken, but not dead. "Tell your masters," she hissed. "I'm not hiding anymore." Then she walked away, slowly, deliberately. As smoke began rising from the cell behind her, the transmitter, it had a second function. It was a fuse, and as she reached the hill overlooking Camp 11K, the entire place went up in flames. Not just the buildings, not just the ruins, but the history, the shame, the wound. Erased, because Ember Vale was done being haunted. She was going to haunt them instead. The courtroom was colder than Ember expected, not in temperature, but in silence. All eyes turned when she entered, some with awe, some with fear, some with the same brand of disdain she'd seen in cell doors and interrogation rooms. But she walked in, unflinching, wearing no makeup, no armor, just truth. Hale sat 2 rows behind. Lita was beside him. Even Rafe, limping, had come. The room was packed, not with press. They had been banned, but with observers, veterans, advocates, witnesses, people who had carried silence for far too long. Now they had a face to follow. The judges looked over documents, stamps, seals, government redactions, and the man on trial. He wore medals on his chest, a pristine suit. But his eyes darted. He recognized Ember. From a hallway long ago, she had screamed his name before passing out. Now she whispered it in the dark corners of testimony. "Colonel Strassen," the prosecutor began, "you are charged with unlawful detainment, torture, wartime conspiracy, and the trafficking of captives to private contractors for experimentation." The room didn't move. Even breathing had become political. Strassen sneered. "All fabricated," he spat. "She's a traumatized soldier. She's not credible." But Ember stood. She hadn't been scheduled to testify today. She hadn't even asked permission. She simply walked to the center of the courtroom, a storm in human form, and she said, calmly, "I am not here to be believed. I am here so no one else has to survive what I did." She handed the judge a drive, confession recordings, project authorization papers, communications between Strassen and Gregor and Vess, documents smuggled out of a ruined city by Miles himself. The judge raised an eyebrow. "This wasn't submitted through legal counsel." "I'm not a lawyer," Ember replied. "I'm just the receipt for what your country tried to throw away." A hush. Then murmurs. Then the colonel screamed. "She's a traitor. She was one of them. She's the reason we lost." But the room had changed. The temperature had changed. The silence was no longer cold. It was heavy, like a coming storm. Witnesses came forward one by one. A medic who falsified charts under orders. A clerk who changed prisoner numbers. A soldier who had once cuffed Ember in the dark, and then left the light on. Not all heroes wear uniforms. Not all villains do either. The judge called for recess. The colonel was taken out screaming. His medals clinked with every movement. Ember sat down slowly. Hale squeezed her hand. "You just rewrote a decade," he whispered. Ember looked straight ahead. Eyes dry, heart heavier than ever. "I didn't want to rewrite history," she said. "I wanted to stop it from repeating." Outside, a crowd had gathered. Photos of victims held high. Signs with names long buried. Not protests. Not riots. Just memory. Made visible. A voice crackled through the loudspeaker in the courtroom. "Emergency injunction from defense counsel," it said. "Motion to dismiss trial due to national security concerns." Ember stood again. This time slower, sharper. "I have one last thing to say." The judge, weary-eyed, nodded. "Go ahead." Ember took out a worn paper, folded and stained. "This is the field report they never filed. It was supposed to say I died in that prison. But I didn't. I lived. And I remembered. I remembered every face. Every scream.
every lock turning while I begged. She stepped forward. I survived what you called necessary. And that makes me dangerous to people who still wear suits like armor. But I don't want revenge. I want accountability. I want a world where girls don't have to become ghosts to be heard. And then she turned to leave. Not because the trial was over, but because her part in it was. Let the world debate justice. Ember had already found her own. She walked out into the morning sun. The crowd parted. No cheers. No chants. Just silence. The kind that meant respect. And finally, peace. It should have felt like the end. But peace was not a switch Ember could flick. It was something she'd have to earn every single day. The trial made headlines across 29 countries. Files were declassified. Names revealed. Victims found. And yet new threats emerged from old shadows. Power doesn't go quietly. It evolves. Morphs. Whispers through different corridors. But Ember had changed too. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a signal. A spark that lit fires across dead places. She moved to a quiet village on the border of no maps. Not to hide, but to build. A school. Not with desks but with mats. And silence. And instinct. She called it the Echo Doctrine. A place for ghosts to find their voices. For broken warriors to be mended. For young fighters to be trained not in vengeance, but vigilance. Hale visited sometimes. Still limping, still loyal. He brought her intel. Photos. Satellites. One of them was unsigned. But Ember knew who it was from. Gregor and Vass. Alive. Disfigured. Underground. Still running something beneath the surface of nations. The message was simple. You should have stayed buried. Ember folded the note. Burned it. Then walked into the courtyard, where her students trained. They froze when they saw her. Some stood straighter. Some nodded. One girl, barely 15, stepped forward. You said one day we'd be ready, she said. To fight. To choose. Are we ready now? Ember looked at her. Saw the same fire that once nearly consumed her. No, she said softly. You'll never be ready. But you'll go anyway. Because that's what survivors do. They show up. Even when the world says stay down. Ember opened the weapons cache under the training hall. She chose the smallest blade. The quietest pistol. She wasn't hunting for war. She was going to finish what the world couldn't. Before she left she paused by the graves at the edge of the village. Markers. Not for bodies. But for names erased by bureaucracy. She traced her fingers across one Mira Lumta fighter. Sister. Vanished. Never forgotten. She whispered something in a language no one taught her. Only survival had given it to her. Then she walked out, into the dusk. Into the new war. Not for blood. Not for medals. But for one simple truth. No one locks her in a room again. No one takes food from her plate. No one silences the girl who came back from the dead. Ember Vale was done surviving. She was ready to lead. And this time the world would follow. Or burn. The desert was wide. But Ember had walked wider. The wind bit at her skin. But she'd endured worse. Her boots sank into dust that once soaked in blood. But that didn't stop her. Every step forward was another nail in the coffin of who she used to be. She no longer feared the silence. She studied it. Listened for fractures in the quiet. Voices had tried to crush her once. Now silence told her everything she needed to know. The world thought Vass had vanished. But ghosts don't vanish. They haunt. They wait. They whisper until someone listens. And Ember was listening. She moved like memory. Fast. Fading. Precise. The intel Hale had delivered wasn't just speculation. It was a map of betrayal. Supply lines. Safe houses. A digital ghost trail that led to a mining station deep beneath the Esteran wastes. Not listed on any satellite. Not sanctioned by any government. It was run by ghosts. Ghosts like Ember. But where she walked to protect. They walked to consume. The station was buried half a mile underground, disguised as a defunct cobalt mine. But Ember had cracked its encryption, and now she was coming to shut it down, not with bombs, but with truth. Truth, like a blade. Sharp, silent, unforgiving. She arrived just before nightfall, dug her way to the service hatch. The keypad blinked red, but her fingers remembered more than codes. She typed 7310. The day she escaped her first cell. The hatch hissed open. Heat spilled out, and so did a voice. Flat. Mechanical. Unauthorized access. Ember didn't flinch. She welcomed the alarm. She wasn't here to sneak. She was here to end it. The corridors were empty. Too empty. It wasn't a lab. Not anymore. It was a vault. For people. She moved past rooms with no names. Just numbers. And behind each door, a silence that screamed. Until she found the core chamber. A massive screen blinked to life. And there he was. Gregor and Vass. Alive. Face mangled by fire. Eyes colder than the walls around him. Well, he said. Voice cracked like frost on steel. They really did let you out. No one lets me out. Ember said. I burned through. He laughed. The sound didn't reach his eyes. You came all this way for revenge. I came for the ones you silenced. They begged. He said. They begged for meaning. And you fed them fear. No. Vass said. I fed them purpose. Same thing. Ember said. He leaned forward. Do you really believe ending me ends this? No. She said. But it ends today. She stepped forward. And the lights cut out. The room plunged into red emergency glow. A trap. Of course. But Ember had trained for worse. She didn't need light. She needed resolve. And she had more than enough. She moved fast. Disarmed two guards as they emerged. Used their own weapons against them. Every shot was a memory paid back in blood. By the time she reached the power core, Vass was gone. Coward. He ran again. But she found the control panel. Typed in her override. And uploaded the files. Names. Dates. Operations. Everything he'd hidden. Everything he'd buried. Now live. Broadcast. Irrevocable. The world would see. And for once it wouldn't look away. She left the station burning. Not from fire. But from truth. Let the wind carry the rest. Let the government scramble. Let the cowards run. Because Ember Vale was no longer a whisper. She was a storm. And her silence had just started to speak. The fire from the underground station still burned behind her. But Ember Vale didn't look back. She never did. The truth was out now. Let the world choke on it. Let them remember the names they buried beneath bureaucracy and blood. She had more to do. More ghosts to exhume. More monsters to name. The journey to the capital took 3 days by foot. She avoided every drone patrol. Slept beneath rusted solar panels. And abandoned wind turbines. The world still spun on the backs of the forgotten. But not for much longer. The leak had spread like wildfire. Her file. The other prisoners. The experiments. The stations. The chain of silence snapped in a dozen places. Panic bloomed in boardrooms. Leaders distanced themselves with trembling hands and cold press releases. But Ember didn't care about headlines. She wanted the last link in the chain. The one who greenlit it all. Chancellor Evar Leontes. A man who never got his hands dirty. Only signed the papers that told others how to. She arrived at the outer walls just before dawn. The gates were sealed. Guarded by soldiers she once trained. She could have killed them all. But she didn't come for bodies. She came for the truth delivered to its throne. So she raised her hands. Let them arrest her. Let them chain her again. As if metal could hold her now. They brought her in under heavy guard. Down long corridors of polished stone and hollow promises.
and into the grand hall, where Leontes waited, hair grayer than his propaganda posters. But the same eyes, sharp, calculating, empty. Ember Vale, he said, standing slowly. I wondered when you'd show. She didn't reply. Didn't need to. The guards tried to shove her to her knees. She didn't move. She was done kneeling. Leontes dismissed them with a flick. The doors closed. Silence again. His favorite weapon. I read the leak, he said. You've caused quite the stir. You caused it, she said coldly. I just lit the match. He chuckled. Low. Mocking. You think this ends me? I don't care if it does, she said. I just want them to know. He circled her like a vulture. But they already forgot. No, she said, voice steady. Not this time. People forget everything. He hissed. They forget the wars. The dead. Even the martyrs. They won't forget me. They will, he said, stepping closer. Because you're just one soldier. I'm the last one they couldn't break, she said. And she stepped forward, close enough to smell the fear under his cologne. You created a system that feeds on silence. And now it's choking on my voice. His face twisted. A mask slipping. She reached into her coat and pulled out the final drive. Encrypted. Unbreakable. Already set to upload to every major server in 10 minutes. Unless she stopped it. Unless he confessed. Broadcast from his own podium. He stared at it like it was a ticking bomb. Because it was. But not of metal or fire. Of memory. Of truth. You're bluffing, he said. She didn't answer. Just placed it on the table between them. 10 minutes. Tick. Tack. Confess, she said. Say the names. Say what you funded. Say what you hid. I'll be killed, he said, voice trembling now. So were we, she whispered. The screen behind him flickered on. Her voice had triggered the system, and faces began to fill the feed. The survivors. The ghosts. Test subjects with numbers for names. Now free. Now watching. His hand trembled. For the first time in decades, Ivar Leontes looked afraid. Not of death, but of remembrance. Of justice. He reached for the mic. Paused. And then, he spoke. My name is Ivar Leontes, he said. I was chancellor for 12 years. I approved the covert rehabilitation labs. I signed off on the black sites. I authorized the silencing of over 2,000 prisoners of war. Each word heavier than the last. Each syllable a nail in his own coffin. When he finished, the silence returned. But this time, it didn't protect him. It swallowed him. The guards re-entered. Confused. Shaken. The entire country had just watched the confession. The world had heard it. There was no walking away from this. Leontes was taken into custody. And Ember. She walked free. Not because they let her, but because no one dared stop her anymore. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. There was still one last thing to do. The names were known, but the dead still waited. The storm had passed over the capital. But for Ember Vale, the silence it left behind was louder than bombs. Her war wasn't over. Because war isn't always fought with guns. Sometimes it's memory that wages battle. And sometimes, the dead don't rest until someone remembers. She traveled alone. No escort. No medals. Only names. Scrawled in her notebook like sacred verses. Not all had graves. Most didn't. Just coordinates. Former black sites. Old buildings. Collapsed bunkers. And open fields where voices had once screamed into stone. Her boots stepped where history had tried to vanish itself. She lit candles in places where light had been denied. She whispered names into the soil. She built monuments out of ash and glass. But she wasn't alone for long. Others came. Survivors. Descendants. Witnesses. They brought photos, ribbons, handwritten notes soaked in rain. A child left a stuffed bear where her mother had once vanished. A man buried his brother's dog tags in soil too bitter to grow. And one old woman handed Ember a folded flag and whispered, "He fought beside you." She hadn't known his name, but now she never forgot it. It was inscribed on the stone that followed. The memorial grew, not tall, but wide, not grand, but unignorable. A place for the forgotten, built by those who refuse to forget. And on its center pillar, one phrase etched in metal: "We remember those who were never meant to be remembered." Ember stood there at sunset. Wind tugged at her jacket. Her hair now streaked with silver, her back still straight. A young girl approached. 15, maybe 16. Burned scars on her cheek. Eyes like fire. "Are you really her?" the girl asked. "The one who burned the fill rooms? The one who walked into the Capitol alone?" Ember didn't answer. Didn't need to. The girl smiled anyway, and pulled out a small notebook. Same leather, same stitching, same habit of writing down everything you couldn't afford to lose. "Will you teach me?" the girl asked. Ember nodded once, because the fight wasn't over, only passed on. The girl sat beside her, opened the notebook, wrote the first name down, and so the new record began. Not of war, not of orders, but of memory, of names once erased, now carved into history. The stars rose above them, silent witnesses, eternal lights for the ones who'd been silenced too soon. Ember Vale finally breathed deep. The air wasn't clean, but it was free, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The girl leaned her head on Ember's shoulder. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Sometimes, silence is no longer a weapon. Sometimes, it's a hymn, a promise, a vow, that even if they tried to bury the truth, someone would always come back to dig. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.